So if you're all right to start, I'll mute my microphone and just keep an eye on the chat for you there. Okay, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Jane. Oh, it's lovely to have you all here. Thank you so much for taking your time to join us today. Yeah, so as Jane said, I'm Natasha Churchill. I'm going to nip to my, that's the one. I'm a senior education mental health practitioner with Trafford Thriving Education, and I'll pass you over to Shannon to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Shannon Hatton Corcoran. I'm an educational psychologist in Trafford.
Okay, thanks, Shannon.
I've already introduced myself, but I'm Jane. I'm an assistant education mental health practitioner at Thriving Education.
Thanks, Jane. Fab. So we are here to think about EBSNA, so emotionally based school non-attendance. So just for obviously there'll be lots of different people on the webinar today, different experience of this. So just a quick sort of reminder. So this is emotionally based school non-attendance. So it's a term adopted by Trafford Council, a number of authorities, to describe children and young people who have significant difficulties in attending school due to a range of emotional factors resulting in extended absence from school. So it's really important that we are having the idea around this, that this is anxiety driven, it's not a choice, it's a can't for whatever reason, multitude of reasons, and not a won't. So Trafford Thrive in education, so we're early intervention service, so we're preventative service, and this early approach may be really impactful in the prevention of worsening EBSNA. So when we're thinking about the early intervention, why that matters around this, we're having a look at this anxiety cycle. When we're thinking about young people who feel anxious about school, and some of this idea might seem fairly obvious, but I think it's really important that we really solidify what's going on and why early intervention is so important. So they might have anxiety and those feelings around school, and then negative thoughts about school and their ability to cope. So avoiding the situation that's invoking that anxiety may help to reduce it, which kind of makes sense. And then obviously there may be an increased school avoidance because the anxiety was being reduced by avoiding school. So within that, we're sort of thinking about the behaviours that we might see. So if young people are not attending school, they are falling behind in schoolwork, which is increasing anxiety. They may start losing connections and that feeling of belonging with friends, and increased isolation from not being there, again increasing the anxiety around school. And pleasurable activities at home, being at home, may also obviously help them not being in school, and it decreases the motivation, and we go again. So it's really important that we're sort of trying to identify this early so that this doesn't become entrenched. There's a need for those young people to increase the feeling of autonomy and belonging and connectedness to school, so they feel safe sort of psychologically and socially as they do at home. And that's what we're looking to sort of make the change within, I guess, for those young people. So what might EBSNA look like? Again, lots of this might be really, really sort of obvious, not attending school at all. But what we're also sort of thinking is what we can do throughout the school. So a kind of a whole school approach. So from the people that they may see first thing in the morning as they come in through the gates, to people in the classrooms, to anybody who may come in contact with young people. Do we see different sort of changes in behaviour, forgetting equipment, unusual sleep patterns, always missing the same day, maybe Mondays? There's sort of parents reporting a different person at weekends and holidays, and so on. I won't read all of these out right now. You'll get the slides, but I think it's the idea of, are we sort of noticing some sort of difference that might be worth flagging up before things escalate? And again, what's beneath that? So this illustrates, really, it is the traditional sort of iceberg the image to illustrate the fact that what we're seeing on the surface, what we're seeing in behaviours, may there may be a whole host of things going on underneath. So it's really important, again, highlighting the whole school approach to EBSNA, with all members of staff recognising that the behaviours we see may be as a result of a huge variation in thoughts and feelings due to individual experiences and circumstances. And therefore, and it can be tricky because obviously we're dealing with lots of different things in the morning, but empathetic and non-judgmental approach is key throughout the school. And I suppose that's one of the key messages from me, is that this idea that this would be sort of enrolled throughout the school, so everybody is sort of recognising or trying to sort of show that professional curiosity around what might be going on for those young people. So there we have ideas of, it may be that a sibling that they have does not attend school. It might be that sort of information that we might not necessarily know about initially, but actually it's something that's happened previously within their home, and now this is something that's affecting them. Okay, Shannon, this is over to you. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, really helpful. I think that iceberg model in kind of helping us to visualize that what we see is not always the full picture, is it, when young people are experiencing difficulties attending school. And this was something that I researched for my thesis, and as part of that I looked into what are young people's experiences. So I suppose here I'm just sharing some of the research that backs up what Natasha was just saying, and I know I've presented this quite a few times. Some of you may have even heard me speak about this before, and it's something that we find often really resonates with professionals and with families in Trafford, but also nationally. So while every child is different, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we understand each child's individual iceberg, what the picture is for them, we do find that there are some common themes, and these are really helpful to bear in mind where we're thinking about whole school practice, like Natasha said. Are there things that we can do at a whole school level to reduce that risk in the first place? But also in those times where we're feeling a bit stuck and we're thinking, I just don't know where to go next for this child, or they're not able to articulate what's going on for them, I just don't know what the reasons are beneath their iceberg. This can be helpful to fall back on and think, well, do any of these themes possibly apply? So within the research that I did, we found there were 4 main themes that young people talked about as kind of beginning or triggering some of their difficulties. The first and most common was difficulties within their peer group. So whether this was through bullying, whether this was through feeling different somehow or not feeling included. This often represented young people with speech and language or social communication difficulties, or international new arrivals, those experiencing lots of transitions, such as those who were involved in the care system. You can see how already those children with some vulnerabilities become more vulnerable again then to difficulties kind of feeling included within school and feeling that they fit in with everybody else. So that feeling accepted and liked by those around them was really, really important. And I know this is where schools are already doing great work. I know lots of you will be involved in things like the Belong Project or in PINS or neurodiversity in schools. And all of these are such important initiatives at that whole school preventative level to help everyone in school feel part of the community and kind of reduce that risk factor from the get-go. The students also talked about inconsistent relationships and support from the adults around them, more so in bigger schools and secondary schools. I think young people found it difficult when one person expected one thing and one person expected another, and they kind of felt, how do I win in this scenario? You know, what are the expectations on me? And this is where some of your kind of send support is really vital. Things like one-page profiles that are up to date, that are read and that are used by staff. So keeping them short, concise, to the point, so that staff know exactly, you know, in a couple of bullet points, what's the need to know about this child, so that they experience a little bit of consistency and support. This can be things, you know, just down to they're allowed to use a 5-minute early pass, or they have a reasonable adjustment to uniform, to reduce how often they're challenged through the day, and again help with that inclusion. Some of the young people also talked about experiences of school transition, and we know that that's a challenge for so many young people anyway. It's a huge change. It's a big thing that happens in their lives. And again, I know loads of work has been done in Trafford over the past few years to really refine that transition, but it's something that we always come back to. And, you know, primary schools here, I'd encourage you to really think about, who are those children that just have that little bit extra? Are teachers even aware that they're doing it? You know, I see some brilliant teams that don't even notice they're going above and beyond, but it then means that's not necessarily passed on to secondary schools. And secondary schools here, you know, how do you make sure you get all of that information from primary schools? What are the processes there to pick up those children who may have 100% attendance? They may not be on the SEND register, but actually are they having little bits of extra support to make that happen and to allow that to be the case? Because we know attendance drops massively into year 7 and even more so in year 8, which we've kind of theorised, is that lovely year 7 pastoral package falls away then, and attendance then dips into year 8. So it's a really important time to think about across kind of the education system how we support those children. They also talked a little bit about negative experiences of learning in school. So this included having SEND needs that had not been identified or were not being met, or just generally finding learning difficult. And this is where we see that cycle kicking in of once they miss a little bit of learning, it can then be harder to get back in. This is where it can be helpful to help children, complete catch-up work or share lesson plans, try and help them stay up to date if you can, because that can be a big thing that contributes to anxiety about then coming back into school if they've missed lessons. They then talked about 3 things that happened after the initial difficulties attending school, but that kind of kept those difficulties going and maintained them. And one of the most interesting things to me was that the vast majority said the difficulties with their mental health, so experiences of anxiety, low mood, things like that, happened after the initial difficulties in school. So this wasn't a mental health condition that just sprung up. It was something that kind of happened as a result of difficulties in other areas, which again tells me that some of this is preventable. These are things that if we can put in really good systems at a school level, we can stop young people getting further down that line if we can spot it early. They also spoke about other people having quite negative perceptions of them, being talked about as if they were choosing to stay off or being lazy. Regardless of your opinion of the scenario, that's not nice to hear. And if we think about feelings of inclusion, feeling part of the school community, what made a difference was the child believing that the adults around them thought they could succeed and thought that the support was going to work. So again, as professionals, part of how we communicate that to children and families is really important. And then their own personal beliefs about attendance, which obviously follow on from a lot of that. Ultimately, if the young person believed they were capable of succeeding and getting back into school, they were much more able to do that. And that's where your pastoral teams, things like mentoring, working with services like Thrive in Education, linking up with specialists can be really valuable for some of those children who are a bit more stuck, to help them turn around and kind of think, actually, no, there is a way I can succeed here, and help to craft that plan together. So if I can move on to the next slide.
No problem.
And so more broadly, what we kind of took from this is what you will have heard before. Children tell us when they're struggling, they show us with their behaviour, and that's how we need to listen. I often talk about young people with EBSNA being the canaries in the coal mine. Often we know it's a bigger issue at a system level, and there are most vulnerable young people who are telling us first that there's a problem there and something that ultimately is affecting everybody's well-being. But they're the slightly more sensitive people who are showing us first that that's something difficult. They talked about their non-attendance as very logical and an understandable response to the situation, without being super negative. We know that schools have a recruitment and a retention crisis. Arguably, we are seeing teachers experiencing EBSNA and experiencing not wanting to go into these environments, because we recognise it is so high stress for everybody in the education system at the moment. It's not just children experiencing this, but that's where, again, those whole school initiatives for things like staff wellbeing, looking after each other, accessing staff supervision, accessing support and training like today, can all be really valuable in helping everybody be that bit more resilient and have that bit more ability to keep going and to kind of look after each other through the day. Ultimately, children and young people wanted to be in school, and that was one of my main takeaways from the research, is that they wanted to be in and they did not enjoy being off. They felt like failures, they were bored. Yes, they might have done things like gaming, but they would have rather been successful and in school than doing that. And that was a real takeaway for me that I still hold on to now when I'm doing casework, and it feels really stuck, is that ultimately everybody does want that child to succeed, and we have to remember that kind of to keep us all positive and working hard. Next slide, please. So Natasha did touch on this earlier, and this is something that I come back to quite a lot in kind of my psychology of all of this, is before I go into really specific strategies, one thing that I always try and bear in mind again is theories of motivation. If anybody here has studied psychology to sort of A-level or degree level, you may have come across this. And it's called self-determination theory. It applies to adults as much as it applies to young people. And it's just a theory of really what helps us feel intrinsically motivated. So that means you're doing something because it feels good, not because you're going to be given a reward for it. And ultimately, that's kind of what we want with going to school, isn't it? We want children to want to go to school, not just because they're going to get a badge or a treat or a trip to the cinema at the end of term, but because they actually want to be there. And self-determination theory tells us that there's kind of 3 things that need to be fulfilled for us to feel intrinsically motivated to do something. Number 1, we have to feel some autonomy, some choice over what we're doing. Where do children get that within education? Something to reflect on. You know, where do we give them autonomy and choice within a day where there's actually quite little, isn't there, for some of them? How do we build that into their routine? Competence. So how do we make sure people are experiencing mastery, so feeling good at what they're doing, or feeling that they are able to develop that skill and they've got that room for improvement? And thirdly, relatedness, and that comes back to what I was talking about earlier, those feelings of connectedness and belonging with other people. And we can all picture scenarios where we've not felt any choice, you know, you're being micromanaged, you've not felt good at what you're doing, or you've not felt that you get on with your team. And they're quite hard environments to work within. So it's really important to kind of think about that at the pupil level. You know, how do we make sure our young people are experiencing these as much as they can within the day? If this is something that's kind of sparked your interest, there's a little link there at the bottom of the slide, and that's a really helpful 30-minute webinar that unpicks these concepts a little bit more. And it has a really wonderful, which I really like and share a lot of, a download, which is a PDF, and it gives classroom strategies for each of these 3 areas. So if you're listening to this thinking, yeah, I don't know how I give them autonomy in my classroom, or how do I build a bit more relatedness, you can download on there a PDF that gives you really helpful practical strategies to kind of think about each of those things.
Next one.
Thank you. And then another framework that I just wanted to touch on before we go on to more individual level strategies is the warmth framework. Now, some of you might be familiar with barriers to education, and again, there's a link there to more information. They're a group which have been set up and established in Greater Manchester, but are now kind of working nationally around barriers to education, as it says. And what they found is that there's some really key overarching principles that have come from feedback from professionals, from families, from young people that help to reduce these barriers, regardless of what the individual iceberg looks like. These are really good principles to kind of bear in mind within any work with a young person who's struggling. So they talk about well-being first, which we know for any of us, you know, if you don't feel safe, you're in fight or flight mode, you're not making memories in a good way. So you can't learn until you feel safe. Affirming practice, and that comes back to a lot of your SEND training, neurodiversity awareness. You know, are we doing things that are helpful for the child rather than just making them conform because it's easier for us? Are we meeting people's needs? Relational approach. Again, I won't bang on about this because I'm sure lots of you know what they are already, but are we prioritising relationships and feelings of safety? Mutual support and partnership. This shouldn't just be on one person's shoulders. Within school, have you got a team that can support with this? Are you linking in with other professionals? Are you linking in with families? How can you make sure this isn't just one person struggling to keep on top of it all, but a team who can meet that need together? Timely response. So are we kind of doing that early intervention and getting in as early as we can? And holistic support. Are we considering everything? So not just, you know, what's happening with the child, but what's happening with their family, what's happening in the wider classroom, what's happening at a wider school level, and how might all of that be influencing what's going on for the child? Helpfully, they spell out warmth, which is what we obviously all want to be as education practitioners. So it's quite a nice acronym to kind of stick that in your head and try and just reflect on some of those themes really when you're working with young people and their families. And as I say, there's a link there for loads more information about this if that's tickled your fancy a little bit. So on to Trafford's graduated approach, and I'm going to try and speak through this quite briefly. If this is something that is brand new to you, on our Padlet, which I can share a link to, and I think there's a link later in the slides, we have a Padlet, an online notice board about EBSNA, and on here there's a longer video of myself and a colleague going through this in a bit more detail. So if you're listening to this thinking, I've no idea what Shannon's talking about, go onto our Padlet and it breaks it down into even more detail in terms of how to follow this approach and what tools you can use. Whereas for purposes of time today, I'll do a bit more of a whistle-stop tour. So the graduated approach that we've developed for school attendance has been developed by a range of multi-agency teams. You can't really see it there on that screenshot because it's so small, but everyone is credited on the document. So do have a look if you think, oh, who's chipped into that? And ultimately it follows your assess, plan, do, review that you would use for SEND, that you use for any other kind of emerging need within school. So if you go on to the next slide for me. Thanks, Natasha.
No problem.
So that just breaks it down into what is going on for the child. What does their iceberg look like? We make a plan off the back of that. We do the plan, we review the plan. It's the same principle. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. It's what you're doing already when children are struggling in school. And we know that this works well when there's early intervention. We're working with parents and carers to hear the child's voice. We've got a holistic picture of everything that's going on, and we're flexible in our response, which I know is what underpins a lot of your SEND support systems already. So again, we're really not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're trying to do more joined up working using the skills and the resources that schools have already got. Next slide, please. So that assess stage, hopefully lots of you are already familiar with this document here, but if you're not, again, it's unpicked a bit more in the video on our Padlet. We've developed a questionnaire that goes through common reasons for difficulties attending school. That's page 1 of about 7 or 8 off the top of my head. It's quite a long document. It takes probably, I would say, an hour to fill in. But the idea is that it allows you to have a neutral framework to sit down with families, with other key adults, and unpick those barriers together. So it's not a grilling, it's not asking people to share all their, horrible things that are going on at home, but it's a neutral way to structure that conversation, get that information out between everybody. And schools that have used it have said you're investing time. They find it a really helpful tool to really get that rich information about the family, about the child, about what's going on for them. Yes, it's a long time to fill that in, and I appreciate where do you find that hour in the week to do that, but what they've said is that the time you then save down the line from knowing that information makes it worth it. So if you've not used that before, we really would encourage you to use it. Some tips from people who found it helpful is it can be helpful to share it with the family in advance. So you could ask them to have a look at it at home and then bring it with them, which might save you some time. Also forewarns them if there's topics that might be difficult to talk about. And you could do the same with school staff, the class teacher. Can they have a look at it and plan? Are there any points that they particularly want to talk about? So there are some kind of ways you can save time a little bit on doing that. Next slide, please. It's also, again, really important to have the child's voice in that. On our Padlet, you'll see we've got a card sort, which is what's pictured there, kind of the bottom left of the slide. Lots of little cards that you can cut out. You can laminate them if you want, whatever kind of works best. And they can help you unpick a little bit with the child in terms of what might be happening for them. I find this can be a really good one to kind of say to them, actually, you're not the only person who's experienced this. And here's some common reasons that people give us why they might struggle to attend school. I wonder if any of them apply to you. And you just normalise it a little bit, because often children feel they are the only person in the world that this is happening to, or families feel like the only people that this is going on for. Or actually, if we can say, these are things that happen for other people as well, it can make them a little bit more able to name what's going on for them and kind of identify some of that. You could also do things like doing a map of the school. So are there areas where they feel safe, where they feel not safe? Could you rag rate a timetable? Which lessons do they feel better in? Just having a chat, particularly older young people, often can just tell you, or there might be a trusted adult or a family member that they're sharing that with. But however you do it, it's really important that we get a sense from the child of what they feel is going on there as well. Thank you. And I'll hand back over to Tasha.
Thank you. So again, really for all school staff, sort of taking time to understand, as Shannon said, those push-pull factors from the child's perspective, may help us in understanding further the thoughts, feelings and behaviours that we see around their school. And I suppose, as Shannon was sort of saying, doing those sort of activities, those tasks described, if that's something that's infiltrated throughout the school, if that's something that everybody is sort of having the same sort of ideas around the approach, it would help with the understanding of what's going on, I suppose, for everybody, and that prevents frustrations, I guess, around this across the school. So we can see around this non-school attendance, we can understand what we can see from behaviours, and we can see what's going on from underneath, and that might help with creating appropriate cycles of support in school as well. So we've got the young person's voice, we've sort of thinking about what we're seeing within school and talking to families, and then we're sort of creating cycles of support within school that are doable, I suppose, and that are appropriate within your setting. Oh, that's over to you, Shannon, about your action plan.
Yeah, just a quick one on this one, I suppose, because I'm aware lots of you will have your own templates that you like to use for recording parent meetings. We have developed a kind of template one here, so if anybody's thinking, oh, we don't have something that's working well, feel free to download ours from the Padlet. I've just shared a link in the chat. The key things really to think about when you're doing your action plan is who is going to be responsible, when is it going to happen, those things that you do in any kind of meeting action plan, and making sure there's clear accountability within that plan of who's doing what. And ultimately, how are we going to redress that balance? What's making them feel not able to go to school? How can we reduce that? What makes them feel more able to go to school? How can we increase that? It really just boils down to something quite simple as that. It doesn't feel simple in practice, I recognise that, but we don't need to overcomplicate it in the plan. We're just thinking about how can we kind of reduce some of those risk factors and increase the protective factors.
I've put us both on this one, Shannon, because I wasn't sure if you want to sort of chip in at any point. But so we're thinking now who can help, wider sort of advice, I guess, agencies that you can use and you can go to. So if after your own cycles of support that you find a young person is still struggling with their attendance, it may be helpful to consult or signpost to one of the following services. So Shannon's mentioned about the Barriers to Learning Padlet, which I signpost schools to all the time. It's extremely helpful. Pupil absence team, SENAS. Is that right? SENAS, isn't it?
Yeah.
Special educational needs and disabilities, so SENDIAS as well. Us, we've got our sort of our skill line that you can contact for sort of again, it's not crisis support because of our remit, but someone will get back to you within 3 to 4 days of contacting that. I think that's later on in the slide, or perhaps Jane could pop that in the chat, maybe link to that. There's CAMS, there's TTT, Trafford Team Together, Virtual School, Trafford Sleep Services and Couth. Lots of, again, towards the end, there's more details about these services. Was there anybody else, Shannon, that you wanted to?
The only thing I just thought, and I think this is because it's a slightly older slide, is we do now have T-Thrive, who opened up earlier this year, and they offer a brilliant pathway as well. Links to all of these teams explaining what they do, who they are, how to refer, is all on the Padlet and also on the Trafford directory. So if you're thinking, I'm not sure who they are or what they do just have a quick look on one of those two sites and it'll give you a bit more info.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Really important there. Actually, young people sometimes that I've worked with myself, when the barriers to coming into school have worsened, a referral then to T-Thrive would be appropriate because they're community based. So where our team would see young people within school or college, where that becomes too much of a barrier, then we can refer to T-Thrive. So that's thanks for that, Shannon.